Thank you, Riley. God, it's so great to see everybody here, to see cycling just continue to take off in ways that were probably unimaginable, or I should say imaginable for people like Riley and Dave Iltis and others even 8 or 10 years ago. I want to also acknowledge, I saw Luke Garrett a little while ago. I know we sort of came in pretty close to each other on our city council. Our city council has been a terrific supporter of cycling and the cycling changes we've been making in the city. And Luke, of course, I don't even know if he owns a car. He gets around largely by bike. So he's really reflective of the kind of spirit, I think, and leadership we see from the city council when it comes to the cycling changes. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in Salt Lake. And things I see for us to do if we're going to continue to be successful going forward, with an emphasis on we. In Salt Lake, we've been incredibly fortunate. Tim Harpst is here, who was the transportation director when I came into office. And we were at that time putting $50,000 a year into biking. Last year, in our budget, we put over $2 million into biking improvements. And this year, I'm confident we'll do more. And we have an incredible staff. Robin Hutchison is now the transportation director. We've got 2 other people full-time working on biking and trail improvements. And that's what it takes. We know that's what it takes to really create the changes, create really the transformation in how we look at how we get around. In our livability agenda for the city, under one key element, the mobility element, our mission is drive if you must and want to, but don't make that necessarily the easiest or best way to get around. And that philosophy, which is described in the more technical world as the complete streets philosophy, we have really taken to heart in the city, and I think we're seeing enormous benefits from it, both in terms of the quality of our community, but in ridership. When I was first running for office, Riley was talking about the ride that we took as a campaign fundraiser, which really didn't raise any money, but we had a great time. When I was first running for office, I have biked my whole life, but I had never been a commuter cyclist. And I knew for me the reason was because virtually almost everyone I knew who was a commuter cyclist had been in an accident with a car. And we know that that is not a very good scenario for cyclists. But as I was walking around the city and knocking on doors, so many people, when I'd say, "What do you want in this city?" said, "I'd love to be able to ride my bike around, but I'm scared to death to get out on the road." And I, of course, related to that. Any of us relate to that as cyclists. And that really was the impetus for me and the catalyst for me to really turn our attention to improving cycling in Salt Lake City. As I said, I think we've been incredibly fortunate. The whole concept for complete streets and for providing for cycling has been embraced by our city council and by a whole range of partners. So we've been, I think, really successful, and it's reflected in all kinds of ways, really thanks in part to the leadership of our Bicycle Advisory Committee and the work we've done as a city. We moved to silver status among cities, been ranked in the top core of cities around the country. Not the top yet, but that's the goal, obviously. And I think we're hoping that within this next year we'll move to gold status among cities across the country. We've also been, as I said, ranked in a whole variety of ways for the improvements we've made for cycling and for being an increasingly bike-friendly culture. We've also seen other benefits as well. We know that every time we get people out of cars, it does a whole number of things. It helps our health if we're cycling or walking more. And if people using transit and bikes, they're always, of course, doing more of that. It improves our air quality in enormous ways. There's obviously no emissions coming out of vehicles. And we all know we need to focus on addressing air quality problems. It saves us money. It may save us a lot of money if we can reduce having vehicles in our household. And it helps with our whole energy future. And maybe most importantly, it changes the quality of the experience people have in our city. When you're in your car, you're kind of in that shell, right? But when you're on a bike or you're walking, you're, by nature, interacting with your surroundings so much more. You're moving at a little slower speed, most of us. We're seeing things more, in part because we're both out there and because we're moving a little more slowly. We have a lot more interaction with the people and community around us. Sometimes those are very unhappy motorists that we're on the road and sharing it with them. And we're also, I think, much more attentive to a whole variety of things. We notice our local businesses. We tend to support local businesses more. And all of that just creates this very healthy community and city lifestyle. So for me, cycling isn't just about getting out on the roads, which so many of us enjoy and experience daily, if not very regularly. It adds to the entire quality of life and experience that we have in our city and in our communities. And it's an immeasurable benefit. I've got to say that one of the things that I think has been almost unbelievable to me, and I see it reflected in the agenda you have today, is that when we really started focusing so much attention on this in Salt Lake City, I think we were viewed as the oddballs among cities and among communities. That doesn't mean there weren't great things happening in other places. The Murdoch Trail you guys will be riding on tomorrow is probably the best trail development in the whole state that I'm aware of. And that Ogden, particularly with its pretty amazing focus on business development around cycling, that's continuing for them to become the #1 cycling business community in the country, which we all, of course, want to support. But Andrew Gruber's on your agenda later, and he and others who participate in the West Edge Front Regional Council, I think, will attest to the energy today in transportation is around active transportation. And when we have those meetings, not only is the room overflowing, both with participants from all the communities up and down the Wasatch Front, but from all of the organizations who have an enormous interest in our transportation future. And it's happening across the board. It does not matter whether it's a denser urban city like Salt Lake or whether it's a suburban community or Davis County or Weber County. The energy around what's happening with cycling and active transportation is where we're all moving. And we're seeing the big institutions that before, I would say, looked at best sort of sideways towards cycling and active transportation, now jumping in with both feet. And so we're seeing huge support and investment now from the Utah Department of Transportation. I know we've got a few people here today from UDOT, but having Carlos Berceros now as the leader of UDOT, who is as active a cyclist as any of us, is incredible. And we could go to Carlos even before he became director and say, you know, we've got a problem. There's no other way than for us to address this on a state road. We need your help. And sometimes, literally after years of getting that shoved back in our faces without success, Carlos would help us work things out. So UTA, of course, who has always been a great supporter of cycling and all the alternative modes of transportation with transit as the lead, is also taking a leadership role. So we're seeing this monumental change. And I think the great challenge and maybe benefit for us is to keep all of that momentum going. And that's where it is incredibly important for people to participate in the decisions. Luke will tell you, and I certainly can tell you, that every time we put in a new bike lane on a street or make a biking improvement, there is huge resistance around that corridor. Businesses who are afraid it's going to hurt their business. I mean, as irrational as those of us who understand transportation and how it works, and cycling is part of it, that is the initial reaction from 90% of the businesses along those corridors. residents along the street who go, what are you doing? You're going to make, or in that area, you're going to make it much more difficult for me to get around. It already is congested, which to any of us who travel around other parts of the country is kind of laughable. But still, you know, there may be 20 minutes a day when that street's congested, so to them it feels congested, and it's all in the perception of folks who live there. And they mount big opposition to the changes. So every time we go through this, and particularly where it moves up to a point where there's some city council consideration, there's huge opposition. And we do not get the support from the cycling community in a major way to offset that. And, you know, those of us who are in politics, you know, we look towards elections, we look towards those who vote for us. And particularly for city council members, it takes very little to upset and unseat a city council member. So a city council member that's looking for re-election, they're kind of weighing, you know, if I take a vote in support of something in my district, and there is this intense opposition to it, am I going to be able to get reelected and continue to do the things that I think are important for our community and for the neighborhood? And I can tell you, even in Salt Lake City, where people think we're at the front edge, and I certainly think we're doing a lot of great things, we have had project after project stopped, including from this university to downtown, now for 3 or 4 years, and we're going to be going through it again this year, because of folks who live along the street and businesses along the street who have mounted a campaign against putting in a segregated, separated, dedicated bikeway system between the university and downtown. So I want to encourage all of you to get involved. If we're going to keep making these improvements, we're going to keep becoming the #1 cycling state and cycling community that we want to become, it needs to happen over the natural and very understandable objections of people who aren't cyclists and people who see cycling as an impediment to either their business or the way they get around and experience their community. That's changing. It's certainly changing, and we know there is very broad support for cycling conceptually. I guess what I'm saying is that on every single decision we make around cycling, it's a tough decision. And I don't think you'll find an elected official anywhere who would say anything different in terms of the experience that we have kind of from our seat in trying to make decisions. So whether it's working at your city level and kind of paying attention through these great forums for information that we have today, or at the regional level with the county or with the Wasatch Front Regional Council, or at the state level, weighing in, I can assure you, will make a huge difference. If there's a hearing and it's a balanced hearing, it's a pretty easy decision to make. If there's a hearing and it's 10-1, and intense, emotional people saying a certain outcome is going to ruin their lives, which is kind of the way things get presented, you know, it gets to be a much tougher decision. So while I know a lot of you, and I appreciate this, go, you know, politics is gross. We look at what happens, you know, in so many places day after day, and it doesn't paint us all in a very good light. And I get that. That's where decisions are being made that are going to allow us to continue to advance in a really significant way what we do as a community, as a neighborhood, as a region, and as a state. So please do really get involved. I know there's a lot of stuff coming out from folks all over in terms of some of the changes that we're looking at making, and that people really want to push forward. Now, a big part of that as well, in terms of the success, comes from all the partnerships we have, and I've really gained an appreciation that our region and our community is particularly well known, and for good reason, for partnering across organizations, partnering within institutions, partnering among levels of government, and partnering between the private profit and the non-profit sectors, whether that's public or private. And the business community has been enormously supportive. When we started Bike Share, you know, it was something that we initiated, and we put in some startup money, and it took us a little while to get it all to get it all put together and rolling, because we wanted to do it right. And while I was pushing really hard, other people saying, wait, we got to do this and got to do that. And I'm glad we took the time to do it right, because it's probably been one of the more successful things I think we've done in the city relating to transportation. And I say that both in terms of its use. Those of you who followed bike share know that we literally lead the country in bike share use for the first year of operation for any city of our size in our first year, which has been incredible. But also now in terms of everyone stepping forward and supporting it in a huge way. 30% of the funding for bike shares from government, 70% of it's from the private sector. We get companies and businesses and organizations to sponsor bike stations, and that's how we are growing. And that's largely what supports the cost of both expanding the bike share system and the Green Bikes program, and in terms of the operations. So we need to continue to rely on those partnerships. We've been incredibly successful. In any way you see, you can help us be successful. This is the heart of the cycling world right here. Please jump in and help us make good decisions. Be considerate when you're on the road of others. If there's one thing that hurts us more as cyclists, it's when we don't obey the rules of the road. And I know it's, a lot of us who grew up not paying any attention to that when we were cycling. But we have to, both for our own safety, for the safety of others, and for the sake of cycling today and for the future. So follow the rules of the road. Be courteous to people. If someone on the road, we've all seen the road rage that comes from some motorists who don't think we deserve there. You know what? Just flipping them off is not going to get you a lot of points, So flip them off in your mind and smile, and it'll go a lot further to help us get a lot of things done. But thank you so much for the work that everyone here, I know, and in other places are doing around cycling, around improving cycling and leading to a greater quality of life. And as sort of the motto's been through my administration for Salt Lake, helping us become and be a great American city.